Welcome back to our channel. The night I told my roommate I had a date, she smiled so fast it looked rehearsed, said that's great in a voice that didn't match her face, then disappeared into her room and didn't come out until morning. I didn't think much of it. I should have. Because 3 weeks later, at a dinner neither of us saw coming, that smile would come apart in front of 8 people, and one of them would say something cruel enough that I'd have to choose, in front of everyone, exactly what she meant to me. My name is John Miller. I'm 32, I work as a software engineer for a mid-sized firm downtown, and for the past 2 years I'd been splitting a 2-bedroom apartment with a woman named Sarah Bennett. We weren't together. We'd never been together. We were just 2 people who'd met through a mutual friend when both our leases ended at the same time, decided splitting rent made sense, and somehow turned convenient roommates into something that felt a lot more like family. She made coffee every morning, strong enough to strip paint. I did the dishes because she hated doing them. We watched bad reality TV on Sunday nights and argued about which contestant deserved to get voted off like it actually mattered. It was easy. It was comfortable. It was, if I'm honest, the best relationship I'd had with anyone in years, and I never once let myself examine why that word, relationship, kept showing up in my head when I thought about her. I hadn't dated anyone seriously in almost 3 years. So when my coworker Derek set me up with a woman named Rachel Carter, I said yes mostly out of momentum. Derek's wife knew Rachel from a book club. Graphic designer, funny, single, normal, which is rare at our age, according to Derek. I laughed and said fine. Low stakes, I figured. Dinner, maybe nothing more. I mentioned it to Sarah on a Tuesday night in the kitchen, her chopping vegetables, me leaning against the counter scrolling through my phone. Derek setting me up with someone Friday, I said. Rachel something. The knife stopped. Not dramatically. Just a beat too long between cuts. When I looked up, Sarah had already recovered, the bright easy smile back on, the one she used at parties with people she didn't know well. That's great, she said. You should go. You okay? Totally. She went back to chopping, faster now. Just surprised. You haven't dated in forever. She finished cooking, ate maybe half of it, said she was tired, and went to bed before 9. I sat on the couch alone and felt the apartment go quiet in a way it hadn't in 2 years. I told myself I was imagining things. I was not imagining things. What I didn't know yet was that Sarah had already told someone. Her closest friend from work, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Megan Ortiz, had been getting the real version of that week over lunch, not the version I got at home. You're seriously going to just smile and hand him off, Megan said, according to what Sarah told me much later, to some woman from a book club. What else am I supposed to do, Megan? Tell him I've been in love with him for a year and ruin the best living situation I've ever had? I'm telling you, this is going to blow up in your face if you don't say something. Megan, apparently, did not believe her, and Megan was right. The days leading up to Friday were strange in a way I couldn't fully name. Sarah wasn't cold. She wasn't avoiding me exactly. But something had shifted, some frequency I'd gotten used to tuning into without realizing I was doing it. She laughed half a second later at my jokes. She left rooms 2 minutes after I entered them, always with a reasonable excuse. On Thursday night, I found her at the kitchen table, laptop open to nothing in particular, staring at the wall. You've been weird all week, I said, sitting across from her. I've been busy. Sarah. She looked at me, really looked, the way she did when she was deciding whether honesty was worth the cost. I'm fine, John. Go have fun tomorrow. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got right now. She closed the laptop. What are you wearing? We spent 20 minutes picking out a shirt like it mattered more than it should have. By the end of it we were laughing again, almost normal. Almost. Friday came. I put on the navy shirt she'd picked and found her in the living room pretending to read a book she wasn't actually reading. How do I look? She glanced up, and for 1 second something moved across her face I'd never seen there before, not annoyance, something closer to grief, quick and quiet and gone before I could be sure I'd seen it. Good, she said. Go. You're going to be late. I went. Dinner with Rachel was pleasant enough on the surface. Warm eyes, easy laugh, sharp enough to make fun of Derek's taste in wine before I'd even sat down. Under any other circumstances I think I'd have been genuinely into it. Instead I spent the first 20 minutes doing math in my head I didn't know I was doing. Somewhere around the appetizers, Rachel asked, "So do you live alone?" No. Roommate. Sarah. How long have you two lived together? 2 years. You said her name like it means something. I hadn't realized I had. I told her about the coffee, the Sunday nights, the fact that Sarah had picked out the shirt I was currently wearing, and the second it left my mouth I heard exactly how it sounded, and Rachel just watched me hear it. John, she said gently, setting down her fork. I don't think I've heard you talk about anyone the way you just talked about your roommate. I didn't have an answer for that. Dinner ended kindly enough. Whatever it is, she said at the door, you clearly need to figure it out. I sat in my car for 20 minutes afterward, replaying 2 years of my life through a lens I'd never used. I drove home with my hands too tight on the wheel. Sarah was on the couch, wrapped in the blanket we always fought over. She sat up fast when the door opened. You're back early. It didn't work out. I stayed in the doorway. She asked about you. I talked about you for 10 minutes without meaning to. Apparently it was noticeable. Something flickered across Sarah's face, hope, quickly suppressed. John, what are you saying? I don't know exactly. But I know you've been strange all week, and I know a total stranger figured out in one dinner what I've apparently been avoiding for 2 years. The silence had weight to it. Sarah pulled the blanket tighter, a shield she probably didn't realize she was raising. When you told me about the date, she said quietly, I cried in my room. Not because you owed me anything. We never said anything, never did anything. But I realized I've been in love with you for probably a year, and I never said it because I was terrified of losing this. She gestured at the space between us. I thought if I told you and you didn't feel the same, I wouldn't just lose a chance. I'd lose you completely. So you smiled and told me to go. Because I love you enough to want you happy even if it wasn't with me. I moved closer, closing the distance I'd stupidly put there 2 minutes earlier. Sarah, I sat in a parking lot for 20 minutes tonight trying to figure out why a perfectly nice woman couldn't hold my attention through an entire dinner. The answer was you. It's been you for a while. I just didn't let myself say it either. We didn't kiss that night. It felt too fragile for that. We talked instead, really talked, for the first time in 2 years, naming everything we'd quietly built without ever calling it what it was. I thought that was the hard part. I was wrong. The hard part was Derek's dinner party 2 weeks later. Derek had been planning it for a month, a small group thing at his place, co-workers and their partners, a let's all finally meet properly dinner that had been on the calendar since before Rachel had ever come up. Derek's wife had, without asking anyone, also invited Rachel. Nobody told me until I was already walking through the door with Sarah beside me, and by then it was too late to do anything but sit down and watch the evening happen to us. John. Derek's wife said, waving us in. And you must be Sarah, I've heard so much. Sarah's hand found mine for half a second before she let go, a quick squeeze that said, I see what's happening here too. The table sat 8. Derek and his wife, 2 other couples from the office, a co-worker named Greg Sanders who'd come alone and already looked 3 drinks ahead of everyone else, and, 3 seats down, Rachel, who looked up when we walked in with an expression that shifted from polite to unmistakably amused in about half a second. John, she said. Wow. Small world. Rachel. Hi. I felt my face go warm. This is Sarah. My roommate. Rachel's eyebrows lifted just slightly. The roommate, she said, in a tone that made a few heads turn. Of course. Nice to finally put a face to the 10 minutes. Sarah smiled like she had no idea what that meant. Derek laughed too loud and said, Wait, what 10 minutes? John talked about her the entire dinner we had, Rachel said, amused, settling into her chair. I figured it out before dessert. The table went quiet in that specific ugly way tables go quiet when they smell something interesting about to happen. Derek's wife looked between the 4 of us with barely restrained delight. Figured out what? One of the other co-workers asked, leaning in. Sarah's fork stopped halfway to her plate. I watched her decide, in real time, whether to laugh it off or let it be true, and I watched her choose the harder thing. That John's in love with me, she said, evenly. Apparently it took a stranger one dinner to see it. Took us 2 years. The table went silent. Priya put her wine glass down slowly. Rachel raised her glass a half-inch in Sarah's direction. Called it, Rachel said. Congratulations. I felt heat crawl up my neck. Instead of wanting to disappear, I reached over, took Sarah's hand on top of the table, in front of all of them. She's right. On both counts. Derek's wife made a sound like she'd just watched a season finale. Sarah went red, then laughed, the real laugh, and squeezed my hand hard enough to hurt. That should have been the whole story. It wasn't. Greg Sanders, who'd been quiet through most of this, refilling his glass more than talking, leaned back in his chair with the particular grin of a man who thought he was about to say something clever. So wait, he said, loud enough to cut through the table's warmth. You fell for your roommate. Like, you couldn't find anyone else, so you just settled for whoever was already doing your dishes. A few people laughed, the nervous kind, the kind that doesn't know yet if it's supposed to be laughing. Greg, Derek said, a warning in it. I'm just saying, Greg went on, waving his glass like it gave him license, that's kind of sad, right? 2 years living together and this is the best either of you could do. No offense. He looked at Sarah with the specific carelessness of a man who genuinely believed no offense undid whatever came before it. It's very, I don't know. Settling. Cute, but settling. The table's temperature dropped about 10 degrees. I felt Sarah go still beside me, her hand tightening in mine, not for comfort now but bracing, the way you brace before an impact you've been expecting your whole life and hoped wouldn't come. I'd seen that look on her before. The dinner table stillness. The fork stopping. I recognized it now for what it was, the exact posture of someone used to being talked about like she wasn't in the room. I set my glass down slowly. Say that again, I said. Greg blinked, some of the bravado draining. I just meant. No, say it again. I want to make sure I heard you correctly, because it sounded like you just told the woman I'm in love with that she's a consolation prize for 2 years of doing my laundry. I didn't mean it like. Then how did you mean it? My voice stayed level, but there was nothing soft left in it. Because from where I'm sitting, you just watch 2 people figure out, in front of a table full of near strangers, that they've loved each other for a year and were too scared to say it, and your first instinct was to make it smaller. To make her smaller. That's not a joke, Greg. That's just cruelty wearing a joke's clothes. The table had gone completely silent now. Derek's wife had a hand pressed to her mouth. Rachel was watching me with an expression I couldn't fully read, something between surprise and approval. I'm not settling, I continued, quieter now, looking at Sarah instead of Greg. I spent 2 years too afraid to say something because what we had was already the best thing in my life, and I didn't want to risk losing it by naming it. That's not settling. That's the opposite of settling. That's finally being brave enough to want something you already have. Sarah's eyes had gone bright, her jaw tight the way it got when she was fighting not to cry in public. Greg, to his credit, had the decency to look uncomfortable. Look, man, I was just making conversation, I didn't think. You didn't think, I agreed. That's exactly the problem. Derek finally found his footing. Greg, that was out of line. It's fine, Sarah said quietly, though it clearly wasn't, not entirely. She looked at Greg with a composure I found myself in awe of, even in that moment. You don't have to apologize to make the table comfortable again. But you should probably think about why settling was the first word that came to mind when you saw two people happy. Greg mumbled something that might have been an apology and found sudden, urgent interest in his plate. The rest of the table exhaled, slowly, the way rooms do after something sharp has passed through them. Rachel, watching all this, leaned toward Sarah with a small, genuine smile. For what it's worth, I've dated a lot of men who wouldn't have said a word. He just publicly went to bat for you in front of his entire office over a granola bar dinner joke. That's not nothing. No, Sarah said, looking at me. It's really not. The rest of the dinner was easier than it had any right to be after that. Greg left early, quietly, without making a scene about leaving, which was the smartest thing he did all night. Rachel and Sarah, of all people, ended up in a warm conversation about design work, no leftover tension between them at all. It was in the car on their way home that the conversation that actually mattered happened. You didn't have to do that, Sarah said, staring out the window. I've had worse said to me. I usually just let it go. I know. That's kind of the problem. I glanced over at her at a red light. How many times have you just let it go, Sarah? How many Gregs have there been? She was quiet for a second. Enough that I stopped expecting anyone to say anything. Well, I'm going to keep saying something. I'm sorry it took me 2 years and a truly bizarre dinner party to start. She reached over and took my hand off the console, quiet for a moment, then said, for the record, that's the first time anyone's ever defended me like that in front of people who mattered to them professionally. Most men worry about looking foolish more than they worry about me looking small. I've decided I don't care how I look. I only care how you feel walking out of a room. That's disgustingly romantic. Megan's going to lose her mind when I tell her. Good. Tell her I said hello, and that her intervention plan is officially retired. We got home, and the apartment felt different that night, same furniture, same blanket still draped over the couch, but the air in it had settled into something steadier. Sarah made tea instead of coffee, since it was late, and we sat at the kitchen table where 2 years of ordinary nights had quietly turned into something neither of us had let ourselves name until strangers, and one deeply unnecessary coworker, said it for us. I keep thinking about Greg's face, she said eventually, smiling despite herself. When you said, say that again. I've genuinely never seen someone go that pale that fast. He deserved it. He did. I'm still going to bring it up at every future work function for the rest of both our careers. Please do. I've decided I'm proud of it. We didn't rush the rest of it, even after that night. We kept living together, because moving apart to prove some kind of point felt absurd when what we actually wanted was more of each other, not less. We told our families, who reacted with the specific, exhausting delight of people who'd apparently seen it coming long before either of us had. Rachel texted a few days after the dinner, glad it worked out. Also tell Sarah that Greg guy is exactly why I quit dating people from work events. You did good, John. I laughed out loud reading it, alone in the kitchen, grateful for a woman perceptive enough to see something before I'd let myself see it, and gracious enough to hand it back without resentment. 6 months later, we moved into a slightly bigger apartment, not because we needed the space but because Sarah wanted a proper office and I wanted a room that wasn't secretly just storage. On moving day, standing in the empty living room, she said, "This is the first place we've ever chosen on purpose, together, as an actual couple. Feels different. Better different. Definitely better." A year after that, I proposed in the kitchen on an ordinary Tuesday, no crowd, no elaborate speech, just the two of us and dinner half made and the coffee maker still warm from that morning. She cried, then laughed, then told me I'd nearly ruined a perfectly good pot of pasta by proposing before she could turn off the stove, and said yes before the water finished boiling over. We got married the following spring in a small backyard ceremony. Derek gave a toast that somehow turned the story of a hijacked dinner party, Greg included, much to everyone's delighted horror, into the most romantic thing that had ever happened to either of us, which, in its own chaotic way, it kind of was. Megan sat in the front row the entire time mouthing "I told her" to anyone who'd make eye contact. Greg, to his credit, sent a genuinely kind card and did not attend, which everyone agreed was the correct call. These days, when people ask how we got together, I tell them the honest version. My roommate heard I was going on a date, smiled too fast, and 3 weeks later got outed by a woman I'd taken to dinner, defended by me in front of 8 co-workers after a truly unnecessary comment from a man who's since become the group chat's favorite cautionary tale. Sarah usually adds, "And he still made me say it first, in public, before he manned up," which is also true, and I've long since stopped arguing with it. Because here's what I learned. Sometimes the person you're looking for isn't a stranger waiting to be discovered on some carefully arranged dinner. Sometimes they are already there, making your coffee too strong, stealing the blanket, quietly building a life alongside you that you're both too afraid to name, until the world, sometimes clumsily, sometimes cruelly, forces you to finally say it out loud. What would you have done if your roommate's reaction to your date got exposed in front of a table full of people, and someone at that table tried to make it small? Would you have said something, or let it go? Tell us your story in the comments. And if this one hit home, leave a like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.